Hello, here is our last lecture before fall break and our test that is going to be due nominally the Friday of fall break. I do hope that everyone will take some time on Monday and Tuesday of fall break and try to relax a little bit, try to recharge. That's a very important thing. Um, and then sometime after um, the test is due, I'll be posting really the rest of the pods, the modules for the rest of the year. So then you'll be at a point where if you want to work ahead, you can work ahead. Excuse me. My allergies are, well, awful today. Uh, just another thing for the year, right? So, what we're going to talk about today is the progressive era. Normally, I would have preferred to have talked about this before we did imperialism because I think it makes imperialism make a little bit more sense, but here we are anyway. Where I actually want to start is 1896, the presidential election. Republicans nominated William McKinley, who, spoiler alert, we know won because he got reelected based on the Spanish American War. The Republicans at the time supported the gold standard and high tariffs. The Democrats nominated William Jennings Bryan, 36 years old. He's the youngest man to actually ever run for president, or actually, I should say, be nominated for president. Um, he was against the tariff and he supported free silver, something called bimetallism, the idea of trying to bring silver up to the same area as gold. You might remember the Sherman Silver Purchase Act that we talked about. The idea was to, have more currency that can be in circulation. Free silver will, in fact, become a plank in the Democratic platform. He will give a speech that I'm actually going to share with you on here as one of the videos to watch this week called the Cross of Gold speech, where basically he's really going to specify and talk about really what the Democratic Party is going to be about from this point on. Now, there will still be some changes within the parties, like at the civil rights era, but you begin to see some of the core beliefs of what makes a Democrat here and a Republican. Um, so I hope that you'll watch the Cross of Gold speech and actually look forward to hearing what you have to say about it in the discussion board. Um, the People's Party, you remember them. They were around briefly. They also nominated William Jennings Bryan as their presidential candidate. Though I think they went with a different vice president, so that might have been weird. Bryant will actually campaign across the country. He's kind of one of the first ones to really do this. McKinley, however, will win with corporate support. He wins about 51% of the vote. And we see a regional pairing for the different parties. That's not really the right word. But we see different parties strength in different regions. The Republicans will become the party of the Midwest and the Northeast, while the Democrats become the party of the South and the West. Obviously, it's very different than that now. Democrats, I think, are still the party of the West, but they're definitely not the party of the South anymore. Now, what that meant for the Democrats, because of their strength in the South, is they had to basically support that notion of states' rights and white supremacy, which is, of course, problematic. The People's Party will disappear after 1896, but they will see some of their goals become law. They will have a graduated income tax that will come during the Progressive era and the direct election of senators, which there is actually a group that is trying to repeal that amendment, where we would go back to state legislators actually deciding who each senator from the states would be. Can you name your state legislators? How many state legislators can you name? Do you really want them deciding who your senator is? All right, so that's the election of 1896. I think after you see the Cross of Gold speech, I think you'll understand what I mean by the emergence of the basic political ideas of the parties. Um, so, the Progressive Era. It actually begins with the middle class who did not like the society that they saw around them. The top 2% controlled the industry and the banks, and they were really concerned about the rich who flaunted it. We saw that in the Gilded Age. Many in the middle class had agreed with the rich's view on the poor, that people were poor because they didn't work hard enough. But that began to change once they saw how the rich acted and how, they put excess profits ahead of people. But big business is dominating the economy. Small business had trouble competing, and you have a lot of small business owners that are in this middle class. From 1897 to 1904, through mergers, 1,800 different firms became 157. We also began to see more of the vertical integration. You remember Rockefeller had his Standard Oil Trust with 90% of the oil business. Factory workers had little chance of advancement. Over half of workers in this country worked in the factories, mines, docks, or the farms of others. I honestly think it's a higher number. Someone looked this up for me a couple semesters ago, and I don't quite remember what it was. But that might be something interesting to look at. Today, I believe it's probably a higher number of people who actually work for someone else. Workers would have low wages, no sick days, and be forced to deal with seasonal layoffs. They did hire middle-class clerks for their bureaucracy, and the middle class was 4% of the population in 1900, and in 1920, the middle class is about 8% of the population. They're becoming more and more sympathetic with the working class. This is the middle class we're talking about. But they also feared the morality, the dancing, the saloons of the working class. They were worried that the working class was giving in to socialism. We're scared of socialism about every 20 years or so in this country. They're also concerned about strikes and violence. As we talked about before, there were a lot of strikes and violence in this country during this time. So the middle class wanted better working conditions, but they also wanted law and order, whatever that even means, really. So what the middle class wants to do, and you can kind of think of the middle class like if you're seeing the Karate Kid, the original one, not whatever Jaden Smith did. Mr. Miyagi said to Daniel-san, one of his lessons was, if you're going down the road, if you're on the left side, you're safe. If you're on the right side, you're safe. If you walk down the middle, sooner or later you get squished like grape. That's the fear that the middle class had, because the middle class was one catastrophe away from becoming poor. So they want to find common ground among the different classes. They also want to change working class culture and to stop the moral decay. And this is the beginnings of the progressive movement and the progressive vision. A big part of the progressive vision will be actually evangelicals, if you can believe that. The progressives will end up forming their own political party, the Progressive Party or the Bull Moose Party in 1912. They wanted to build a broad coalition among the classes. Women were often active in this political movement. There are other things that are kind of going on at the same time. Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. This was, I'll see if I can find you a small documentary on this. HBO actually did one several years ago that was really good. Wasn't too terribly long. I don't think I could probably get you that one. But if you got HBO Max, look for that. Triangle Shirtwaist Factory. Catastrophe. So basically what had happened, this was a shirt factory. It was actually on the top floor of a building. and employed mostly women. The owners got fed up with the women taking unauthorized breaks to go to the bathroom. That's right. They got on for going to the bathroom. So eventually they locked them in. Well, unfortunately, one day a fire broke out and the doors are locked. The fire trucks cannot reach the top of the building. So you have people in there who have a choice. They can die in the fire of smoke inhalation, I suppose if they're lucky, or as some of them actually did, they actually leaped out the windows to their death. Well, as horrible as this was, it is going to lead to calls for reform. You're going to end up with new building codes in New York. Out of this actually will come, if you've ever seen any New York sitcom, there's always a scene on the fire escape. This is actually why we have fire escapes in some building codes now. So, it'll lead to different reforms, making working conditions a little bit better, though it is going to be a long, long road. They also work to have clean pasteurized milk, which is a process that leads to milk lasting longer. Can't imagine it being shorter than the week and a half I seem to get. Women also formed the National Women's Suffrage Association works. This will lead to a constitutional amendment in 1920 after World War I, which will allow women to vote. And I'm sure there are some people who want to repeal that too. The deciding final vote was cast, as I probably have mentioned before many times, because this is a point of pride, I think, for Tennessee. It's actually the Tennessee State Legislature that does the deciding vote, and it passed basically by one vote. They actually held the vote open, trying to get people to change their minds. The guy that voted said basically he did it because his mother told him to, which is a good reason to do pretty much anything. So that is definitely a proud moment for the state of Tennessee. We also have Josiah Strong. You might remember him as the anti-immigrant preacher guy. He preached the social gospel, talked about the importance of Christian charity, and wanted to improve the lives of the poor. He wanted government regulations to protect workers, but really, some in the progressive era do not really go far enough because they're always looking for a middle ground so everyone could kind of agree. What they wanted to do was to create a socially just capitalist America. Now, what's going to make the progressive era is that we are going to have 3 straight progressive presidents, 2 Republicans, 1 Democrat. Yes, Republicans at one point were progressive, at least some of them. Teddy Roosevelt is our main guy here. He's the one that's going to get this thing started. He was a progressive from New York. He had been police commissioner in New York City from 1895 to 97. He was a friend of Jacob Riis, as we saw last time. He was the hero of the Spanish-American War. The Republican Party wanted to use his celebrity to help McKinley at the polls, but the corporate interests in the party did not really care for his progressive streak, so they decided to put him in a position where he could do very little harm. And so they made him vice president in order to bury him. One vice president in our history one time said, the vice presidency isn't worth a warm bucket of spit. So basically, just think about how many times in this country have we actually had a vice president succeed a president in the presidency under his own term in his own election. John Adams, George H.W. Bush, others. Well, Harry Truman. But, it's hard to think of any. Usually in the past, the position you really wanted in government, if you wanted to make a run for the presidency, was actually Secretary of State. So Unfortunately for the Republicans and McKinley, um, this was a time where we had a major problem with anarchists. And McKinley will be shot and killed by an anarchist, thus making Teddy Roosevelt president. Now, it took some time to actually find him because he was out on a camping trip with some friends, and so we kind of didn't have a president for a little bit. So in ushers the term of Teddy Roosevelt. He wanted to make reforms in order to save democracy. His presidency, his Labor Department, well, not his Labor Department because that doesn't exist yet, his Justice Department will mediate labor disputes. He'll get involved himself. He will bring antitrust suits against Northern Securities and Standard Oil. We'll get into that in a bit. On May 12, 1902, when 140,000 Northeast Pennsylvania miners walked out, they wanted an 8-hour workday, higher wages, and recognition of their union, the UMW. Mine owners refused to negotiate. Well, Roosevelt tended to favor the labor unions. And he says, hey, why don't we come all together here at the White House and we'll talk it over. And, we'll come to some sort of agreement. The mine owners were like, no, we're not going to do that. So basically, Roosevelt said, okay, well, the mines are very important for national security. And what I will do if you refuse to negotiate, I will send in the army. We will take over the mine and we will pay the workers whatever we damn well want to. So, not surprisingly, the owners were like, hey, let's come and sit down. So, basically, what the compromise ended up being was a 9-hour workday, a 10% wage hike, but the owners did not have to recognize the union. So, really, it was a compromise. And the government did some good there, I think. This is also the time of the muckrakers. This is probably the best time for investigative journalism in our country. Ida Turnbull will expose Rockefeller and Standard Oil. Now, Ida had an axe to grind because Ida's father had been put out of business by Rockefeller, but that doesn't take away from how tenacious and accurate the reporting was. So Roosevelt agreed that corporations were important, but he saw that there were good trusts and bad trusts. Good trusts, he basically said, well, technically they're illegal, but they serve an important purpose, so a good trust will be allowed to exist. A bad trust, he's going to bust up. So in 1901, he decides to break up Northern Securities. This was a company actually owned by J.P. Morgan. He had created a large transportation conglomerate of railroads and steamships. He basically took over travel in the Northeast. So the government filed an antitrust suit. Morgan wanted to make a backroom deal. Roosevelt refused. And in 1904, the Supreme Court upheld the dissolution order. This helped lead to the re-election of Roosevelt. His next target was Standard Oil in 1906, and the Supreme Court will order it dissolved in 1911. One thing he's also going to do is he's going to strengthen the Interstate Commerce Commission. In 1906, he gets Congress to pass the Hepburn Act, which gave the ICC power to set rates among railroads and other industries. And then Congress passes the Mann-Elks Act, which puts the ICC in charge of telegraph and telephone. That's actually going to be extremely important because that's what made telephones a utility, and the government basically forced telephones to go wherever any American citizen lived. So that's why rural areas had phone service, and we're told they couldn't charge an exorbitant amount. Actually, I think that this should still be used today. I actually think this should be used to mandate broadband for everybody because, well, as we are definitely learning this semester, broadband is a very important thing. And so the government should use these Mann-Elkin powers, the power of the ICC, to make sure everybody has access, I think, to broadband. So that's a good place to stop video one. Um, Part two, we'll talk about Roosevelt's success.